"Your filthy hands don't even deserve to touch that piano," shouted the Millionaire CEO, humiliating the employee in front of all the guests. The piano was a sacred relic of his late partner, and he treated it like trash just because she admired it. But at the exact moment of the humiliation, the family lawyer interrupted the party. He had the will. The CEO was smiling, sure he would inherit everything. But when the lawyer read the main clause about the piano, the silence was absolute. All the guests looked shocked, not at the CEO, but at the employee. She wasn't just looking, she was the only one there who held the key to the secret locked inside it. The luxury penthouse in Manhattan hovered over the city like an eagle's nest, a refuge of glass and steel where the glow of urban lights mingled with the clinking of crystal glasses. The party, ostensibly in memory of Arthur Vance, the company's brilliant co-founder, was in truth a meticulously staged coronation for his remaining partner, CEO Oliver Thorne. He moved through the room with the posture of a king in his domain, each gesture calculated to display power and a wealth that seemed inexhaustible. At the center of it all, like a sacred, untouched relic, rested Arthur's grand piano, a majestic instrument of dark wood and ivory keys. Oliver made a point of gesturing to it for each new guest, his voice resonating with false reverence about what a priceless heritage it was. He spoke of the piano as just another of his valuable assets, a symbol of the capital he now solely controlled. Clara Hayes, one of the servers hired for the event, moved like a shadow among the guests. Her silver tray reflected polished smiles and glittering jewelry, but her eyes saw beyond the opulence. She served drinks with quiet efficiency, keeping her head down, trying to make herself invisible. In a brief moment of calm, as most guests flocked to the terrace to admire the view, she felt a magnetic pull, a force that guided her to the center of the room. She stopped inches from the piano, her heart pounding. She didn't dare touch it, but her fingers curled in the air, yearning for the familiar texture of the keys. Her eyes traced the polished wood, the contour of the keyboard, and a wave of genuine grief, a painful familiarity that no one else there seemed to truly share, washed over her. That piano was not an object. It was the soul of a man she had known in a way no one could possibly imagine. Oliver, from across the room, noticed the scene. His lips curled into a disdainful smile. Here was the perfect opportunity to reinforce his authority, to demonstrate the chasm that existed between him and the hired help. He marched toward her, his expensive shoes echoing on the polished marble, his voice loud enough to cut through the ambient music and draw every eye. "What do you think you are doing?" he snarled, his tone dripping with contempt. Clara shrank back, her body stiffening in shock, the tray trembling in her hands. "Don't you dare touch that piano with those hands! Your hands don't deserve to touch that piano!" He turned to the uncomfortable audience, amplifying the spectacle of his cruelty. "This is a relic. It belonged to my partner, a genius. It's not to be sullied by the filthy hands of the hired help. Go back to the kitchen where you belong." Humiliated, her face burning and tears stinging her eyes, Clara was about to turn and flee when a deep, calm voice cut through the tense silence. "Mr. Thorne, my apologies for interrupting your party." It was Mr. Wallace, the family's longtime attorney and the executor of Arthur's will. Oliver's irritation at the interruption was palpable. "Wallace, what are you doing here? We've read the will. Everything's settled. I'm in charge now, as you well know." The lawyer met his gaze with a serene composure that stood in stark contrast to the CEO's arrogance. "Not entirely," he said, pulling a sealed envelope from his inner jacket pocket. "Arthur left a final codicil, a personal letter to be read specifically on this date, should this piano still be here." Oliver's smile faltered, a shadow of uncertainty crossing his face. The confidence he projected over his immense fortune and power seemed, for an instant, to crack. Oliver's smile didn't just falter, it disintegrated, replaced by a mask of disbelief and growing dread. The silence in the penthouse was so profound that the distant hum of Manhattan traffic miles below seemed to invade the room. Mr. Wallace, impassive before the storm brewing on the CEO's face, adjusted his glasses and, with a solemnity that gave weight to every syllable, opened the sealed envelope. The paper rustled, a sharp, fragile sound that cut through the tension. He cleared his throat and the entire room held its breath. The lawyer's voice, clear and firm, filled the space, reading the words Arthur had left as his final act. To all present, I, Arthur Vance, leave my final wish. My piano is not a dead relic. It is my soul. And it, along with 51% of my shares and controlling interest in the company I helped build. A collective murmur swept through the room. Oliver's face, once flushed with anger, turned waxen pale. His fists clenched at his sides, his nails digging into his palms. He could feel his control over his business, over the empire he considered his by right, slipping through his fingers. The lawyer continued, his voice unshakable, each word a hammer blow to Oliver's ego. I leave to the only person in this world who understood the value of music above the value of money. The only person whose hands not only deserve to touch this piano, but are the only ones for which it was ever intended. The pause Mr. Wallace took was dramatic, a theatrical device he knew was necessary. His eyes rose from the letter and swept over the stunned crowd before settling, with an unexpected gentleness, on Clara. I leave everything to my secret protégé, whom I have been anonymously sponsoring at the Vienna Music Academy for the last 5 years. Mrs. Clara Hayes. Every gaze in the room, as if pulled by a single invisible string, swiveled in shock toward the humiliated server. Clara stood frozen, the silver tray forgotten in her hands. The lawyer's words echoed in her mind, dissolving the fog of shame and replacing it with a whirlwind of incomprehensible emotions. Vienna. The anonymous sponsorship, the mysterious generosity that had changed the course of her life. It had been him, Arthur. All along, it had been him. The tears that had burned with humiliation now flowed freely, not from shame, but from an overwhelming sense of loss and a gratitude so profound it ached. The CEO hadn't just insulted an employee, he had humiliated the new owner of the company, his partner's true heir, and, as of that moment, his new boss. The initial shock in the room gave way to a frenzy of whispers. The news spread like wildfire. Oliver, finally breaking from his paralytic stupor, exploded. "This is absurd! A fraud!" he screamed, his voice shrill with fury. He advanced on the lawyer, his face contorted in a mask of hatred. You forged this! Arthur would never do something like this. He left me in charge. His entire fortune, his shares, his estate. It was all meant to be consolidated under my leadership. Mr. Wallace did not flinch. I have all the authenticated documentation, Oliver. The inheritance is legitimate. Arthur's will is clear and irrevocable. Scorned, Oliver turned on Clara, who was still weeping silently. His eyes, full of venom, bore into her. He saw her not as an heiress, but as a thief, a usurper threatening to steal everything he believed was his. He took a step toward her, his finger jabbing the air. "You!" He spat the word. "You won't touch a cent of this money. This is a scam, and I'll prove it." Oliver's threat hung in the air, thick and poisonous. You won't touch a cent of this money. This is a scam, and I'll prove it." The words echoed in the dead silence that had fallen over the penthouse. For Clara, the world seemed to contract, the glittering lights, the shocked faces, and the curious whispers becoming an indistinct blur. The only thing in focus was the grand piano before her, a beacon of memory in a storm of chaos. The scale of the inheritance, the shares, the sudden fortune, it was all abstract. A concept so far removed from her reality, it felt like it belonged to someone else. What hit her with the force of a tidal wave was the pain of loss and the revelation of Arthur's secret care. He had watched over her from afar, believed in her, invested in her dream while she felt utterly alone in the world. That was the true wealth she had just discovered. Mr. Wallace stepped forward, subtly positioning himself between Oliver and Clara, a shield of legality and calm. "Your accusations are serious and baseless, Oliver," he said, his voice controlled but firm. "Arthur's will was meticulously documented and authenticated. The transfer of his assets, including his controlling interest, is immediate. Attempting to obstruct this process will have serious legal consequences." Oliver let out a laugh, a harsh sound devoid of humor. He gestured dismissively toward Clara. "Look at her! Just look at her!" he bellowed to the guests, who were now watching the scene as if it were a stage play. "Do you think she has any capacity to manage an estate of this magnitude, to understand investments, the stock market, the complex cash flow that keeps this company on top? She will destroy Arthur's legacy in 6 months." The words were like stones, meant to wound her, to diminish her, to paint her as an incompetent fool. And for a moment, doubt assailed her. He was right. What did she know about business? Her life had been dedicated to music, to scores, to the pursuit of the perfect note. But then she looked at the piano again and felt Arthur's strength beside her. Humiliation gave way to a fragile but resolute courage. She lifted her chin, the tears drying on her face, and met Oliver's furious gaze. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but carried a conviction that silenced the murmurs. "You speak of money, of profit, of dividends," she said. Each word carefully chosen. "Arthur spoke to me of soul. He taught me that true worth isn't counted in dollars, but in the dreams we bring to life." Slowly, as if in a dream, she stepped forward, ignoring Oliver's menacing presence. Her hand, which had trembled with fear and shame, was now steady. She reached out and, for the first time, touched the piano. Her fingers rested on the cool, smooth ivory keys. It was not the touch of a server sullying a relic, but of a pianist rediscovering a part of herself. The gesture was a silent declaration, more powerful than any shout. She was taking possession not of the fortune, but of the legacy. That act of defiance was the final straw for Oliver. Seeing that his verbal intimidation had failed, his face twisted into a cold, calculating fury. He whipped his phone from his pocket, the gesture sharp and aggressive. "Michael," he said into the phone, his voice loud so that everyone, especially Clara, could hear, "Get the board on the line. Emergency meeting tomorrow, 7 a.m. sharp. We're invoking the corporate stability clause. Inform everyone that the new majority shareholder is the caterer from the party." He paused, a cruel smirk forming on his lips as he stared directly at Clara. Let's see how long Wall Street takes to gut her net worth before she even has a chance to touch it." Oliver's declaration of war hung in the air like the smoke from a freshly fired gun. The evening spell was instantly broken. The guests, once relaxed and laughing, now moved with an uncomfortable haste, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and morbid curiosity. They made their farewells with hurried waves, avoiding the eyes of both Oliver, who looked like a volcano about to erupt, and Clara, the server who had become a billionaire in the blink of an eye. She was the epicenter of a social earthquake, and no one knew where to stand. Oliver said nothing more. He shot Clara a look that promised annihilation, turned on his heel, and strode out, his hard, angry footsteps echoing through the room. The silence he left behind was heavier and more menacing than his shouts. The catering staff, Clara's colleagues only minutes before, began clearing the room in a reverent silence. They moved around her with a palpable hesitation, unsure whether to treat her as an equal or as the new owner of everything. This sudden distance wounded her more than the guests' arrogance. In an instant, she had become a stranger in her own world, isolated by a fortune she could not yet comprehend. She remained standing by the piano, her hand still resting on the cool wood, her only anchor in a sea of uncertainty. The scale of the inheritance, the power she now held, it all terrified her. The board meeting summons was a countdown to a disaster she had no idea how to prevent. "Miss Hayes." Mr. Wallace's calm voice brought her back to reality. He approached with an expression of serene compassion. "I know this is all overwhelming." Clara turned to him, her eyes wide with panic. "Overwhelming, Mr. Wallace. I don't know the first thing about corporations or treasuries or managing this kind of capital. Oliver is right. I'm going to destroy everything." The lawyer offered a faint smile. "Arthur knew that he didn't choose a CEO, he chose you." He guided her to one of the sofas, away from the curious ears of the cleaning crew. "Oliver will move quickly," he explained in a low voice. "His strategy is clear. Create panic. He'll paint you as an impulsive amateur. Leak to the press that the company is under the control of someone with no experience. The goal is to spook the shareholders, make the stock value plummet. With the company's net worth devalued, he'll try to convince the board to remove you to protect their investments." Every word was a knot tightening in her stomach. It felt like a complex and cruel game whose rules she didn't know. "But what can I do? He's going to eat me alive in that meeting." Mr. Wallace looked at her, his eyes steady behind his glasses. Arthur was a genius, not just at creating technology, but at understanding people. He anticipated Oliver's reaction, and he did not leave you unprepared. The lawyer reached into his inner jacket pocket, the same one from which he'd pulled the letter, and took out a small, old-fashioned brass key. He placed it in Clara's palm. It was cool and heavy. "This key opens the drawer of Arthur's personal desk in the main office. He gave me very specific instructions to give it to you as soon as the letter was read." He paused, his eyes glinting with a shared secret. "He said that inside you would find the first part of the score." Clara clutched the small brass key, the cool metal, a stark contrast to the anxiety warming her skin. The first part of the score. The phrase echoed in her mind, a poetic riddle in the midst of a corporate war. It was so like Arthur. Even after he was gone, he communicated through musical metaphors, turning a battle for power and money into a composition to be deciphered. That small object in her hand was more than a key. It was a lifeline, a promise that she was not entirely alone in this arena of sharks. The penthouse, now nearly empty, felt vast and intimidating. The luxury that had once made her feel small and insignificant was now, somehow, hers. But it was a strange and hostile territory, and the board meeting the next morning loomed like an impending execution. Mr. Wallace, sensing the turmoil on her face, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Clara, Arthur trusted your intelligence and your intuition. He wouldn't have put you in this position if he didn't believe you were capable. He didn't just see a talented pianist. He saw strength, resilience, and above all, an integrity that the business world desperately needs." His words were a balm, but the fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. How could her musical intuition help her navigate balance sheets, profit projections, and investment strategies? Oliver dominated that language. To him, the world was made of numbers, of assets and liabilities. To her, it was made of harmonies and dissonances. "I'll take you to the office," Mr. Wallace said, guiding her out of the room and toward a private elevator she never knew existed. The silent ride down to the corporate floors was like descending into another world. The doors opened onto a hushed, elegant hallway lined with dark wood and discreet art. The air was rarefied, thick with the quiet power of big money. The executive suite was actually two interconnected offices. One, Oliver's G, was modern, cold, and impersonal, decorated with business awards and framed stock charts. The other, Arthur's, was a sanctuary. The walls were lined with books, not on business, but on philosophy, history, and quantum physics. There were musical scores scattered about, a cello leaning in one corner, and at the center, a magnificent mahogany desk, the very one for which the key in her hand was made. With a pounding heart, Clara approached it. The wood of the desk was warm to the touch, imbued with memories. She found the keyhole, inserted the key, and turned. The soft click seemed to echo down the entire floor. She pulled the drawer open, and, for a moment, her heart sank. It was nearly empty. There was only an old black-covered notebook worn with use and a single manila envelope of the type used for internal documents. She picked up the envelope first. Inside, there were no spreadsheets or financial reports. There was a series of old photographs. In them, a much younger Oliver stood beside Arthur. In the first few pictures, they were smiling, looking like friends, partners. As the photos progressed through time, Oliver's smile became more forced, his eyes harder. The glow of friendship gave way to the shadow of rivalry. The last photo showed the two of them at the inauguration of the company headquarters. Arthur was looking toward the horizon with a dreamy expression, while Oliver stared directly at the camera, his eyes fixed, possessive, as if claiming all the credit for himself. The image told a silent story of ambition and betrayal. It wasn't a musical score, but it was certainly the overture to a tragic opera. Clara spread the photographs across the mahogany desk, the history of a friendship's rise and fall laid out before her. The images were a silent prelude to the war she was about to face. They revealed the corrosive ambition of Oliver, a man who had gradually let himself be consumed by a thirst for power and wealth, to the point of eclipsing the brilliance of the very partner who had helped him build everything. She felt a pang of sadness for Arthur, for having witnessed this transformation in his closest friend. Now, she understood better. Arthur's decision in the will had not been an act of impulse, but the final move in a long and painful chess game. Mr. Wallace watched her in silence, allowing her to absorb the information at her own pace. Finally, Clara picked up the black notebook. Its pages were densely filled with Arthur's elegant handwriting. It wasn't a diary, nor was it a book of business notes. It was a compendium of ideas, reflections, and codes. There were sequences of musical notes jotted down next to market projections, cash flow diagrams intertwined with complex harmonies, and notes on cryptocurrency investments that morphed into fugues and counterpoints. To a layman, it would look like the ravings of a madman. To Clara, it was like reading Arthur's soul. He thought in music. He structured his thoughts on business, on the future, on people, as if he were composing a symphony. The score, he had mentioned, was not a single document, but his entire way of seeing the world, a method that only someone with the same musical sensibility could begin to decipher. She flipped through the pages, her breath catching in her throat. In one section, dated nearly a year prior, Arthur had written, "Oliver is obsessed with short-term growth. He pushes for R&D cuts to inflate quarterly dividends. He doesn't understand that true profitability comes from innovation, from investing in the impossible. It's like trying to play an allegro by cutting out all the 16th notes. You get the main beats, but you lose the music, you lose the soul." In another note, he compared the stock market's volatility to a Stravinsky passage, unpredictable and chaotic, but with an underlying logic for those who knew how to listen. He had developed investment algorithms based on musical patterns, using harmonic theory to predict market trends. They were brilliant, unorthodox strategies that Oliver, with his pragmatic, dollar-obsessed worldview, would surely have dismissed as eccentricity. "Mr. Wallace," Clara said, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and dread, "I think I'm starting to understand. This is a playbook." She pointed to a specific page where Arthur had detailed a project called Project Seed. It was a secret investment fund, separate from the company's main assets, which Arthur had been feeding with a small percentage of his own profits. He used it to fund impossible tech startups. Ideas the board, under Oliver's influence, had rejected as too risky. Arthur saw them as the future, the true engine of long-term growth, the next big thing that would ensure the company's perpetuity. Next to the financial notes, he had written a quote from Gustav Mahler: "Tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire." Suddenly, Oliver's strategy for the morning's meeting became terrifyingly clear to her. He would accuse her of being inexperienced, a threat to the company's assets. He would use the last quarter's numbers, inflated by his R&D cuts, as proof of his superior management. He would corner her with technical questions, expecting her to stammer and crumble. But Arthur, through this notebook, had given her the answers. He had given her the ammunition. Project Seed was the key. It was proof that Oliver's vision was myopic and that the company's true soul, its capacity to innovate, was being systematically suffocated. The meeting wouldn't be her execution, it would be her debut recital. And she wasn't just going to play the notes, she was going to conduct the orchestra. At the very back of the notebook, on the last page, was a final entry, like a coda, for Clara. If you are reading this, it means the dissonance has become unbearable. Remember, the rest is as important as the note. Don't be afraid of the silence. Use it. Below that was a name and a phone number. Dr. Evelyn Reed, head of R&D, terminated. The next morning arrived cold and grey, a perfect reflection of Clara's mood. The clock on the dashboard of Mr. Wallace's car read 6:45 a.m., and each click of the second hand felt like a racing heartbeat. She held Arthur's notebook in her lap like a shield. She had spent the night awake, not just reading his notes but absorbing them, trying to tune her mind to his frequency. She had made a call at 4 a.m. to the number at the back of the book. A sleepy, suspicious voice had answered. But when Clara mentioned Arthur's name and Project Seed, the tone had changed completely. Now, an unlikely ally was on her way, a crucial part of the symphony she hoped to conduct. Still, the fear was a constant companion. She was about to walk into a room full of people who saw her as an anomaly, a server who had stumbled into a fortune she didn't deserve. The company headquarters looked like a fortress of glass and steel under the overcast sky. As they entered the boardroom, the atmosphere was even colder than she had imagined. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by stern, skeptical faces. These were the board members, men and women who spoke the language of money, profit, and compound interest. They sized her up, the disdain barely concealed in their eyes. Oliver sat at the head of the table, the king on his throne, exuding a predatory confidence. He smiled at her, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the same forced smile from the last photograph in the envelope. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "so glad you could join us. Please have a seat. We have much to discuss about the future of our estate." Oliver wasted no time. As soon as the door closed, he launched his attack. He projected charts onto the wall showing spikes in profitability, increased dividends. He spoke of the importance of stability for the stock market, of investor confidence. Every sentence was a calculated blow designed to paint her as a risk, an imminent threat to the company's assets. "With all due respect to Arthur," he said, feigning a reverence that sounded obscene, his final decision was purely emotional. To place control of a multi-billion-dollar corporation in the hands of someone with absolutely no experience in management, finance, or business is, to be blunt, a recipe for disaster. Our stock has already felt the impact of this uncertainty. Clara felt the board's eyes on her, the pressure mounting with every second. Her mind reeled, panic threatened to suffocate her. Then Arthur's last note came to her. "The rest is as important as the note. Don't be afraid of the silence. Use it." Instead of stammering a hurried defense, she did just that. She remained silent. She let Oliver's accusation hang in the air, the silence stretching for 1, 2, 5 seconds. The discomfort in the room became palpable. Oliver, who had expected an emotional outburst or a frightened retreat, frowned, caught off guard by her composure. The board members leaned forward, their curiosity overcoming their disdain. Finally she spoke. Her voice was quiet but clear and steady, cutting through the tension. "You're right, Mr. Thorne. I don't understand charts. My life has been dedicated to music." She looked at each board member. "But Arthur taught me that business and music aren't so different. You've shown us an allegro, a fast and impressive movement of quarterly profits. But at what cost? You've cut out the heart of the orchestra, the research and development department." Oliver laughed. "A necessary fiscal measure to maximize shareholder return." Clara shook her head slowly. "No. It was like stripping the strings from a Stradivarius to sell the wood. Arthur knew that, and that's why he created Project Seed." The name landed like a stone in the room. The color drained from Oliver's face. He stared at her, shock and fury warring for supremacy in his eyes. How could she possibly know? It was a buried secret. Clara rose to her feet, authority wrapping around her like a cloak. "Arthur used his own capital to continue funding the future you tried to sell off. He believed that true fortune isn't in today's profit, but in tomorrow's innovation." She turned toward the door. "But I'm not the only one who believes that." She nodded to Mr. Wallace, who opened the boardroom door. A middle-aged woman with intelligent eyes and a determined expression walked in. "Members of the board, I'd like to introduce Dr. Evelyn Reed, the former head of R&D, who personally led every project in the seed fund before she was fired by Mr. Thorne for budget cuts." The entrance of Dr. Evelyn Reed into the boardroom had the effect of a shocking, dissonant chord in the middle of a predictable melody. The board, which had thus far seen the situation as a simple succession drama, was now confronted with something far more complex. The faces, once impassive or disdainful, now showed a range of emotions from surprise to genuine intrigue. Oliver, for his part, looked as though he had been physically struck. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What is she doing here? This is a board meeting. She has no right to be here. Security!" he yelled, panic turning his voice into a high-pitched yelp. Mr. Wallace, however, stepped forward, blocking the doorway. "With all due respect, Oliver, Ms. Hayes is the majority shareholder. She has the right to invite anyone she deems necessary to inform the board. And Dr. Reed, I believe, has information of vital importance to the future of this company." Evelyn Reed was not intimidated by Oliver's fury. She walked with a quiet confidence to the table, carrying a tablet. Her eyes met Oliver's with a chilling coldness, the look of someone who had been wronged and now saw a chance for vindication. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice calm but resonant with authority. "For the last 2 years, at Arthur's request, I have been leading a parallel research team, funded directly from his personal estate. While the main company, under Mr. Thorne's directive, focused on optimizing short-term profits, we focused on disruptive innovation." She connected her tablet to the room's projector. Oliver's chart of dividends vanished, replaced by schematics, prototypes, and projections of technology that looked like it was pulled from science fiction. Arthur was worried, Evelyn continued, as the images cycled through. He saw that our market leadership was becoming complacent. He knew that without aggressive investment in new ideas, our capital, however vast, would eventually be eroded by more agile competitors. She presented 3 main projects that Project Seed had secretly invested in. One was a new form of decentralized energy storage, built on cryptocurrency and blockchain that could revolutionize the power grid. The second was a biosynthetic material with the potential to replace plastics on an industrial scale. The third and most impressive was an artificial intelligence software interface Arthur had named Maestro, capable of optimizing complex systems with unprecedented efficiency. The board members were mesmerized. Murmurs of awe and admiration replaced the skeptical silence. These weren't just ideas, they were entire businesses ready to launch, each with the potential to generate a fortune far greater than the profit squeezed from Oliver's cuts. Clara watched it all, her heart pounding with a mix of pride in Arthur and a growing sense of her own power. She wasn't just an heiress, she was the guardian of a legacy, the custodian of a future that had almost been extinguished by greed. Oliver, seeing his control of the room slipping away, tried one last desperate counterattack. This is vaporware, a dreamer's fantasies. There's no proof any of this is viable or will ever generate a single dollar of profit, he blustered. Evelyn met his gaze with a cool smile. On the contrary, we have working prototypes for all 3 projects, and as for profitability, she clicked a button, and the next screen showed preliminary agreements and letters of intent from some of the world's largest corporations, all expressing eager interest in licensing or acquiring the technology. They were documents Evelyn and Arthur had been cultivating in secret for months. Arthur was about to present all of this to the board, Evelyn said, her voice catching for a moment. He was just waiting for the right time. Clara then stood, drawing all eyes to her. "Mr. Thorne speaks of protecting the company's assets," she said, her voice firm. "But the greatest assets of this company are not on the balance sheets. They are here." She pointed to the images on the projector. "They are in Arthur's vision for the future. A vision he entrusted to me to protect and to nurture. And that is exactly what I intend to do." Clara's words echoed in the room with the weight of a final declaration. "And that is exactly what I intend to do." There was no arrogance in her tone, only the calm determination of someone who had finally found her purpose. The dynamic in the boardroom had completely inverted. The board, which had once looked down on her, now saw her in a new light. She was not a lucky server, but the bearer of Arthur's true vision, the key to a future of innovation and exponential wealth they had almost lost. The board members' eyes darted from Clara to Evelyn, then to the brilliant projects on the screen, greed and admiration replacing hostility. They were, above all, business people, and what they saw was not the risk Oliver had painted, but the greatest investment opportunity of their lifetimes. Oliver was cornered, his narrative of short-term stability and profit crumbling before the promise of a much greater fortune. His fury curdled into a silent, ugly despair. He glanced around the table, searching for an ally, a supportive look, but found none. He found only the calculating eyes of his peers as they discarded him, realigning their loyalties toward the new center of power. The humiliation was a poison burning in his veins. He, the seasoned CEO, the master of the corporate universe, had been outmaneuvered by a pianist and an engineer he himself had fired. His defeat was total and public. One of the board members, a respected older woman named Beatrice, cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "Miss Hayes," she said, the formal address now laden with genuine respect, "Arthur's vision, as presented by Dr. Reed, is extraordinary. The board, I am certain, is eager to understand the next steps. How do you plan to integrate these projects into the company's structure?" The question was not a challenge, but an invitation. It was the acknowledgement of her leadership. Clara felt a shiver, a mix of fear and exhilaration. This was the moment of truth. She took a deep breath, remembering the long nights spent poring over Arthur's notebook, not just reading the notes but feeling the music behind them. "My first action," Clara began, "will be to reinstate Dr. Evelyn Reed as head of research and development, with an expanded budget and full autonomy to accelerate the development of Project Seed. All capital that was diverted from R&D to artificially inflate dividends will be redirected to where it always belonged: innovation." She paused, looking directly at Oliver, who glared back with pure hatred. Secondly, I propose the creation of a new board position, a chair for ethics and long-term vision, a position to be held by someone who understands that our net worth is not measured in dollars alone, but in the positive impact we can have on the world. A role to ensure that the soul of the company, as Arthur called it, is never again sold for 30 pieces of silver. The proposal was bold, a fundamental shift in the company's philosophy, but backed by the promise of profit from Evelyn's projects. It was met with nods of approval. Clara was rewriting the rules, using the language of innovation and ethics to win over the capitalist hearts and minds around her. Oliver, seeing the battle was lost, couldn't contain himself. "This is a circus," he spat. "Ethics, soul, this is a business. Our duty is to the shareholders, to the bottom line. You'll run us into the ground with this kindergarten philosophy." Beatrice, the board member, cut him off with a voice as cold as ice. "On the contrary, Oliver, what Ms. Hayes is proposing is the only way to guarantee sustainable profits. You offered us a snack. She is offering us a feast. I believe the choice, for any intelligent investor, is obvious. The blow was final. Oliver slumped in his chair, defeated. The silence that followed was his sentence. He was no longer the king. He was a relic of a greedy, short-sighted past, a ghost at the coronation of a new queen. The board meeting ended not with a bang, but with the quiet resignation of the old guard. Oliver remained seated, petrified, as the other members rose one by one to shake Clara's hand. Their expressions were of newfound respect and a palpable excitement for the company's new direction. They spoke of synergy, disruption, and new markets, quickly adapting their vocabulary to the new melody Clara had introduced. She responded to each of them with a grace and composure that surprised even herself. It was as if, by embracing Arthur's legacy, she had absorbed some of his strength and confidence. When the room finally emptied, only Clara, Evelyn, Mr. Wallace, and the diminished figure of Oliver remained. He finally looked up, and what Clara saw in his eyes was not just hatred, but a profound emptiness. It was the look of a man who had bet everything on the wrong metrics, who had amassed a fortune in currency but had become spiritually bankrupt. "You won," he said, his voice hoarse, stripped of its former arrogance. "You took it all." Clara shook her head. "You're mistaken. I didn't take anything. Arthur entrusted me with something you once had and let slip away. Purpose." She walked to the table and picked up the black notebook. "He never wanted to take the company from you, Oliver. He wanted to save it from you. He wanted to save you from yourself." Oliver let out a bitter laugh. "Save me? He humiliated me. He made me a laughingstock in front of everyone. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Clara saw a flash of the young man from the photographs, the friend, the partner, before the shadow of ambition consumed him. "What happened to you two?" she asked, the question genuine, not an accusation. "The pictures. You looked so close." For the first time, an emotion other than rage crossed Oliver's face. An old, long-buried pain. "He was the genius," he said, almost a whisper. "Always was. The ideas, the vision, it all came from him. I was the business guy. I turned his dreams into profit, into stock value, into an empire. I built the structure that allowed his music to be heard." He stood and walked to the window, his back to them. But at some point, that stopped being enough. People only saw him. The dreaming genius. I was just the money man. I started to think that if I could make more and more profit, if the value of the assets became big enough, they would finally see my worth. I wanted to prove that my contribution was just as important as his. It was a confession. The tragedy of a man lost in his own insecurity, who tried to quantify his worth in dollars because he doubted his intrinsic value. He had become so obsessed with proving he was the foundation of the company that he began to saw away at the very pillars to show how strong he was. "He always valued you, Oliver," Clara said softly, recalling passages in the notebook where Arthur referred to Oliver's business acumen with genuine admiration, lamenting the distance that had grown between them. "He just wished you had stopped to listen to the music." Oliver didn't reply. He remained silent, looking out at the city stretching below, the empire he had helped build and no longer commanded. There was no victory in the air, only a profound melancholy. Clara had won the battle for control of the company, but she realized the true struggle, yes, the harder one, would be to heal the wounds and rebuild the bridges that ambition and insecurity had burned. Arthur's symphony wasn't about winning or losing, it was about finding harmony, and the composition was far from over. In the days that followed, news of the power shift spread like a controlled burn through the financial channels. The press, initially skeptical and sensational, painting Clara as a corporate Cinderella, quickly changed its tune as Evelyn Reed began to strategically leak details of the seed projects. The company's stock, which had taken an initial hit on rumors of instability, skyrocketed. Market analysts who had once aligned with Oliver's cost-cutting philosophy now praised the long-term vision and disruptive potential of the new leadership. The business world, with its short memory and fluid allegiance to profit, crowned a new queen. Clara, however, felt anything but royal. She moved into a modest apartment, refusing to occupy Arthur's lavish penthouse, which remained a silent sanctuary. Her days were a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, department heads, and investors. She spent hours with Evelyn, diving into the technical details of the projects, and just as many with Mr. Wallace, learning the fundamentals of corporate governance. She was a diligent student, absorbing information at a dizzying pace, driven by a sense of duty to Arthur's legacy. But the nights were the hardest. That was when the silence set in, and the enormity of her new life crashed down on her. She would sit at the piano she'd had moved into her new home, not Arthur's, but a simple upright that had been with her since the conservatory, and her fingers would hesitate over the keys. Music, which had always been her refuge, now felt distant, muffled by the weight of her new responsibilities. She missed Arthur in a way that went beyond grief. She missed her mentor, the man who understood her without a word. His notebook was her guide, but it was a map left by someone who had already completed the journey. She was on the path alone. Her relationship with Oliver was an open wound. On Mr. Wallace's advice, she had not fired him. He remained CEO, but his power was neutered. He now reported to her and the board, executing the new directives. He attended meetings, silent and grim, performing his duties with a robotic efficiency. There were no more outbursts, just a chilling coldness that was, in a way, more unnerving. It was an armed peace, a precarious balance that could shatter at any moment. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in Arthur's old office, she found something she had missed that first night. Deep in the desk drawer, under a false bottom, was a second envelope. Inside there were no business documents, but a single sheet of letterhead bearing Arthur's handwriting. It was a letter, but it wasn't for her. It began, "My dear Oliver." Clara's heart leaped. She hesitated, feeling like an intruder. But her intuition told her Arthur had meant for it to be found, that this was the second part of the score. She read. The letter was a bittersweet reminiscence of their friendship. Arthur wrote of their college dreams, of how his vision and Oliver's pragmatism were two sides of the same coin, how one could not have succeeded without the other. "I watched you get lost, my friend," Arthur wrote. "I saw the joy in your eyes, replaced by the weight of numbers. You started building walls to protect our fortune, not realizing you were trapping yourself inside them. Money was supposed to be a tool to build dreams, not a fortress to hide from the fear of failure. The most devastating passage came at the end. I am leaving you the most precious thing I have, not the shares, not the piano. I am leaving you Clara. She is the embodiment of everything we forgot. That true value lies not in what we own, but in what we can create. She is your chance to remember the music. Don't fight her. Learn from her. This is my last venture. My final investment's in you. Tears streamed down Clara's face as she finished reading. The will hadn't been an act of revenge against Oliver. It had been an act of love, a friend's last, desperate attempt to save another. It was a rescue plan, and she, Clara, was the instrument. Clara held Arthur's letter, the fragile paper feeling as if it weighed a ton in her hands. Every word was a revelation, recontextualizing everything that had happened. The humiliation at the party, the battle in the boardroom, the silent tension of the following days. It wasn't the end of a rivalry, but the beginning of a complex journey of redemption that Arthur had orchestrated. He hadn't just bequeathed her a fortune in assets. He had given her a far heavier, more delicate responsibility, the soul of his lost friend. That was the true net worth he wanted to protect. For a moment, anger flared. How could he place such an immense burden on her shoulders? She was a pianist, not a savior of souls, but the anger dissipated as quickly as it came, replaced by a profound understanding and a wave of compassion for both men, for their hopes and their hurts. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't wait. Placing the letter back in the envelope, she left the office, moving with a resolve she hadn't felt before. She was no longer the frightened heiress or the novice executive. She was Arthur's messenger, the conductor of his final piece. She found Oliver in his own office, the glass door revealing him standing with his back to the entrance, gazing out at the city through the massive picture window, a silhouette of lonely power. He seemed to do that a lot lately, like an exiled king surveying his former kingdom. She knocked softly on the glass. He turned, the usual surprise and hostility in his eyes. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice sharp. Clara didn't answer. She simply walked in, went to his desk, and placed the envelope on the polished wood. Their eyes met over it. His name, "My dear Oliver," written in Arthur's unmistakable script, was visible through the paper. Oliver's face, normally a mask of impassive control, broke. A flicker of pain, of shock, of raw vulnerability passed over him. He looked from the envelope to Clara's face, a silent question in his eyes. "I found it in his drawer," she said softly. "I believe it was meant for you." He reached out a trembling hand and took the envelope. His fingers, accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar contracts and manipulating the fates of thousands, seemed clumsy, uncertain. He didn't open it in front of her. He just held it. The silence in the office was absolute, filled only by their two held breaths. Oliver began, his voice thick. He never gave up, did he? Always with his dramatic gestures, his metaphors, his scores. He turned back to the window, as if he couldn't bear for her to see the emotion threatening to spill over. "I hated him for what he did at the party," he confessed, his voice low, the words aimed more at the glass than at her. "I hated him for giving you everything, for humiliating me. I thought it was his final act of contempt for me, for everything I stood for." Clara moved closer, stopping a few feet away. "It wasn't contempt," she said. "It was hope. He didn't take the company from you. He took the burden from you. He saw the person you were, not just the CEO you had become." Oliver finally turned to face her, and for the first time, Clara saw tears glistening in the hardened billionaire's eyes. They were not tears of anger or defeat, but of a deep, overwhelming grief. "He was my best friend," he whispered, the confession tearing from his chest. "And I lost him long before he left. I lost him to stock charts, to quarterly reports, to the fear of not being good enough. In that moment, he was not the rival, the enemy. He was just a man confronting the bankruptcy of his own soul." Clara, moved by an impulse that came from the heart, took the final step that separated them. In a gesture neither of them could have predicted, she reached out and placed her hand gently on his arm, a simple, profound touch of human connection in an empire of glass and steel. He didn't pull away. Instead, the great Oliver Thorne, the titan of industry, bowed his head, and a single, choked sob escaped his lips, the sound of armor finally breaking. Oliver's sob was the sound of a dam breaking. Decades of pride, insecurity, and repressed grief came flooding out in a silent wave of emotion. Clara stood by him, her hand on his arm, not as a boss or a rival, but as a silent witness to a pain she was only just beginning to comprehend. She offered no empty words of comfort. She just stood there, present, sharing the silence, just as Arthur had instructed in his notebook. The rest is as important as the note. When the wave of emotion finally subsided, Oliver raised his head. His eyes were red, but the hardness that usually inhabited them was gone, replaced by a transparent exhaustion and a painful clarity. "Thank you," he said, the simple words carrying an immense weight. In the months that followed, a subtle but profound transformation began. Arthur's letter, coupled with Clara's act of compassion, was the catalyst for a tectonic shift in Oliver's soul. He didn't quit the company or become an idealistic dreamer overnight. Instead, he began to integrate the two halves of his history. His business acumen, once wielded as a weapon to amass power, was now put in service of Arthur's vision. He became Clara and Evelyn's staunchest advocate, using his vast experience to navigate the complex financial markets and ensure that the seed projects not only flourished, but also generated a sustainable cash flow, protecting Arthur's legacy with the same ferocity with which he had once protected his own ego. The dynamic between him and Clara evolved into an unlikely partnership built on mutual respect. She was the keeper of the vision, the moral compass pointing the company's ethical north. He was the pragmatic architect who built the bridges to get there. In board meetings, they sat side by side, their voices complementing each other in an unexpected harmony. Clara would speak of the soul of the projects, of the impact they would have on people's lives. Oliver would translate that vision into profitability projections and market strategies, showing the board how doing good was also excellent business. Together, they were stronger than either Arthur or Oliver had ever been alone. They had become, in fact, the two sides of the same coin Arthur had described in his letter. One of the most significant moments of this transformation came 6 months after that night in the penthouse. Clara hosted an event, not a lavish party, but an intimate concert in the company auditorium to announce the creation of the Arthur Vance Foundation, an organization dedicated to funding young talent in both music and science, using a percentage of the profits from the seed projects. Employees, board members, and business partners were all present. At the center of the stage was Arthur's grand piano, no longer an untouched relic, but a living instrument. Clara walked to it, not in a server's uniform, but in the elegance of a concert pianist. She sat, and a reverent silence filled the auditorium. Her fingers, finally free from the weight of conflict, danced across the keys, and the music that flowed was an original composition, full of melancholy, struggle, and finally, a radiant hope. It was their story, told in notes. As the final note hung in the air, Clara rose and bowed. Then she turned to the audience. Tonight, Arthur's music lives on not just in his compositions, but in the future we are building. And to celebrate that, I would like to announce the new president of the Arthur Vance Foundation, someone who knew Arthur's heart better than anyone and who will now dedicate himself to ensuring his legacy of nurturing dreams is never lost. She smiled and extended a hand toward the front row. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Oliver Thorne." A murmur of shock and admiration rippled through the audience as Oliver, visibly emotional, stood and walked to the stage, not to seize power, but to accept a role of service, applauded by everyone, but most of all, by the woman he had once humiliated and who had now become his greatest ally. The applause in the auditorium was long and heartfelt. Oliver stepped onto the stage, shook Clara's hand, and turned to the audience. There was no trace of the arrogant CEO from that night in the penthouse. In his place stood a quieter, more reflective man, whose wealth was now measured not just by his bank balance, but by the weight of the purpose he had rediscovered. In a brief, humble speech, he spoke of friendship, second chances, and how true legacies are built not with steel and glass, but with the opportunities we create for others. He accepted the presidency of the foundation not as a consolation prize, but as the most important mission of his career. It was his way of continuing the conversation with his old friend, of finally listening to the music again. Clara's life found a new and beautiful equilibrium. She did not abdicate her role as majority shareholder and chairwoman of the board. On the contrary, she embraced it fully, proving to be a visionary and empathetic leader, guiding the company into an era of unprecedented prosperity where profit and purpose walked hand in hand. The seed projects blossomed, transforming industries and generating a fortune that was constantly reinvested in new research and the foundation. But she also carved out sacred time for her first passion. The nights were no longer lonely or anxious. They were filled with music. Arthur's piano was finally moved to the penthouse, which he had transformed not into an opulent residence, but a creative space, a studio where she composed and practiced, feeling her mentor's presence in every harmony. The relationship between Clara and Oliver became the bedrock of the new company culture, a friendship forged in the fire of conflict and cemented by mutual respect. They were living proof that collaboration could triumph over competition, and that vulnerability was a strength, not a weakness. Oliver, with his vast knowledge of the business world, became Clara's mentor in finance and management, and she, with her emotional intelligence and connection to the company's soul, became his mentor in everything money couldn't buy. They often met at the end of the day in Arthur's old office, not to discuss balance sheets, but to share ideas, dreams, and sometimes just to enjoy a comfortable silence like two old friends. A year after the reading of the will, the luxury penthouse hosted another event. This time, it wasn't a party to display power, but a celebration of life and legacy. The guests were the young musicians and scientists who had received the first grants from the Arthur Vance Foundation. The sound filling the air was not of empty chatter about the stock market or the price of gold, but of laughter, of passionate arguments about new theories, and, of course, of music. At the center of the room, Clara sat at Arthur's grand piano and began to play. The melody was gentle but powerful, a song of resilience and hope. Oliver leaned against a pillar, watching her with a genuine smile. He didn't see a server or a boss. He saw a friend. He saw the woman who, with courage and grace, had saved them all, including himself. He finally understood Arthur's last investment, and its return was, indeed, priceless. The music floated through the room, out the open windows, and across the New York night, a promise that even in the coldest structures of capital and business, the human soul, like music, always finds a way to flourish.